Well, just as we all suspected, yesterday a third suspect was arrested in the Savanah, Soto, and Matthew Guerra case. Hey everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And tonight I want to talk a little bit about some new developments in the Savanah, Soto, and Matthew Guerra case. I also want to go through the arrest affidavit for Christopher Preciado and Ramon Preciado. And I want to compare the information that we know now that Mirtha Romanos was arrested yesterday and what was stated in the arrest affidavit after Christopher and Ramon were arrested. Now, I'm not going to read the entire affidavit. I'm just going to touch on some parts that I felt were kind of important and kind of expand on what's in the affidavit itself. So, in the beginning of the affidavit, basically, they're just going through all the names and naming all the victims and suspects. And they're also talking a little bit about the period in the very beginning when Savanah's family had contacted law enforcement about, Savanah as a missing person. Now, the first part of the affidavit talks about, that they issued a clear alert for Savanah and that the family was trying to get a hold of Savanah and she wasn't returning their calls or answering her phone. Now, Matthew's family was also trying to get a hold of Matthew, and he wasn't responding to their calls either. So the first part of the affidavit basically talks about the families reporting that Savanah and Matthew were missing. Now, let's pick up on December 26th. Basically, it says that a resident of the 5903 Danny K. Drive address contacted the family through messaging, and they let the family know that they believed that Matthew's car was parked at this address. So basically what it says is that the family, Savanah's family, contacted law enforcement, and then they drove over to see if in fact that was Matthew's car. Now, it goes on to basically say that when Leon Valley Police arrived at the scene, at the car, they witnessed from the outside that there was a female in the front passenger side who was deceased, and she appeared to have trauma to her head. Now, there was also a male in the back seat that appeared to have a bullet wound to his head. So when they're outside of the vehicle, they basically can see that Savanah has injuries to her head. Now, they don't come right out and say that there's a bullet wound to her head as they're viewing, Savanah's body from the outside of the vehicle. But they do state that Matthew did have a bullet wound to his head, which they could see from the outside of the vehicle. So basically, they go on to talk about that they put in for a search warrant so that they can actually enter this car. And they also confirm through the vehicle identification number and the license plate number on Matthew's car that this is in fact Matthew's vehicle. So while they're waiting for the warrant or for the search warrant to go in and actually enter the vehicle, they talk to the families of the victims. And this is where Matthew's family informs law enforcement that Matthew does in fact sell narcotics. Now, he sells narcotics through his cell phone and through social media. So they do let law enforcement know that he does use his cell phone and social media for business. Now, they also let law enforcement know that Matthew is very flashy. And he likes to post, money and narcotics on his social networks. So The family informs law enforcement that there were people who wanted to rob Matthew. And there had already been a few people that had taken a few shots at Matthew as well. Now, when the search warrant arrives at the location, law enforcement is able to enter the vehicle. Now, when they enter the vehicle, it says that the search found a spent shell casing in the vehicle. So there's a shell casing in the vehicle, but it also says that there was no weapon recovered in the vehicle. So it states that there was apparent blood transfer on the outside of the vehicle. So basically, this is probably from when Matthew was dragged into the back seat. So there's probably blood transfer on the outside, of the vehicle, and maybe the door sill where they can see that Matthew has been dragged into the back seat of the car. Now, they also confirm that both Savanah and Matthew had bullet wounds to their heads. So once they're in the car, they confirm that their lives were both taken, and they both had bullet wounds to the head. Now, it also says that there were drag marks on Matthew's back from where it looked like he had been dragged. So I would think that Matthew's life was taken outside of the car, and that he was then dragged and placed into the back seat of the car. And that would be the reason for the drag marks on his back. Now it goes into the surveillance video footage, that we all saw. We all saw Matthew's car and Ramon's, black pickup truck in this surveillance video. But basically, it goes on to detail the path that they took in Matthew's car, as well as the path that Ramon took in his truck. And they say that, video surveillance picked them up driving through this apartment complex parking lot, meeting up, which is the footage that we all saw. And then it states that they went to the back of the building, both vehicles, and only 3 minutes later, the truck reappears from the back of the building and drives away. But Matthew's vehicle does not, return from the back of the building. So basically, Ramon and Christopher and Mirta, that we know now, are caught on surveillance video. I mean, the video shows pretty much exactly how they dumped this car, with Matthew and Savanah's bodies inside. Now, law enforcement does believe that the footage that we saw, the video footage that we saw of Ramon and Christopher meeting up in that parking lot, law enforcement does believe that Savanah and Matthew were in the car at that time. So they were just getting ready to go dump the vehicle. Now, it seems strange, because it seems strange to me that I feel like either they just didn't care about getting caught, or they were just sloppy, because, they've left a shell casing in the car with Matthew and Savanah. And now we know that shell casing comes back to Mirta, Christopher's stepmom's firearm. So they just left a spent shell casing that could be traced back to Mirta Romanos. And basically, the whole time that they're dumping the vehicle, it's on surveillance video. So these people were doomed from the beginning. These people, either this was something that just happened, really quickly and really random, or they just really didn't care about getting caught. because it was very sloppy. They were very, very, very sloppy. Now, it goes on to say on January 2nd, law enforcement provided one of the victim's cell phones to a detective at the Technical Investigation Unit. Now, law enforcement went through Savanah's cell phone. And this is where they got a lot of their information, because Savanah was actually looking up the address for the Preciado home. So they had this. Now, they also had correspondence on these phones, with Matthew, selling narcotics, and Savanah also kind of taking part in that as well. So these people basically left a digital footprint. I mean, they're basically seen on surveillance video, dumping the vehicle, and now the victim's phones are kind of telling law enforcement another big chunk of this story. So it goes on to basically say that law enforcement basically gets information about the black truck from this surveillance video. Now, they look into this information, and it comes back to Ramon Preciado, which matches the description of the heavy-set man who got out of the truck and walked over to Matthew's vehicle in the surveillance video. So now they're on to Ramon Preciado. And Ramon Preciado also just happens to live on Charlie Chan Drive, which is the address that Savanah was looking for on her phone. Now, law enforcement goes to the Preciado home, and parked right there in the driveway is Ramon's black pickup truck. So they didn't even try to stash the truck. It's parked right out in the driveway. Now, when law enforcement approaches the home and begins talking to Ramon, Ramon states that he knows why law enforcement is at his house. So law enforcement arrests Christopher and Ramon. Now, they also question Mirta at this time. And in the PCA, Mirta states that she's not really sure what happened that evening, and she thinks that it's very possible that she could have actually been sleeping. Now, law enforcement was on to Mirta from the beginning, I believe, because we all saw somebody throw that towel to Ramon. So we knew that there was a third individual involved. Well, Mirta was caught because of surveillance camera in their neighborhood. And Mirta is seen going with Ramon in the truck and then shortly returning with Christopher. So the three of them are in the truck when they return. And this is all caught on surveillance video. So they know that Mirta's involved. Now, not only is Mirta involved, but it's also her firearm that was used to commit this crime. So, one thing I don't understand about all of this is why did the whole family have to go dump the car? I don't understand that. And that's what leads me to believe that the whole family, that Ramon, Mirta, and Christopher, were all in on this crime from the very beginning. They make it sound as though, Christopher committed this crime, and then Ramon and Mirta were basically helping him, get rid of the car and also, get rid of Savanah and Matthew's bodies. But I feel like the three of them were involved from the very beginning, and I'm going to tell you why. I think they were all involved from the beginning because why would they all need to go dump Matthew's car? I mean, Matthew's car was dumped not very far away from the Preciado home. So it just seems strange that, Ramon and Mirta would incriminate themselves by following Matthew to the spot where they're going to dump, or following Christopher to the spot where they're going to dump Matthew's car, and then giving Christopher a ride back home. That just seems strange. Why would Ramon and Mirta incriminate themselves like that? They don't really need to follow Christopher. I mean, he dropped this car off not far from where he lived. He could have easily just walked home and not incriminated Ramon and Mirta. But that's what makes me believe that all three of them were in on this from the very beginning. It's very possible that Ramon and Mirta followed Christopher and went with Christopher to dump Matthew's car to make sure that he actually did go dump Matthew's car and Savanah and Matthew's bodies. So it really wouldn't have been necessary for Ramon and Mirta to go with Christopher. Christopher could have walked back to his house from where he dumped the car and kept his mom and dad out of it. But they didn't do that. All three of them went along to dump Matthew's car. And that leads me to believe that all three of them were possibly in on this crime from the very, very beginning. Now, law enforcement also stated in the arrest affidavit that the actual crimes took place in a different location than where Matthew Guerra's vehicle was recovered. But we don't know where that location is. So law enforcement at this time, right now, law enforcement has not revealed where the location of the actual crimes took place. Now, do I believe that law enforcement knows, the location of where the crimes took place? I would think that they do. They've got 3 suspects in custody right now. And these investigators have been on top of this. So they're just knocking this down piece by piece. And I would believe that law enforcement probably does know the location of where these crimes occurred. Now, it goes on to talk about, law enforcement had talked to Ramon and they talked to Christopher. And Christopher makes a claim that Matthew pointed his weapon at Christopher. Now, Christopher goes on to say that he wrestles with Matthew for this weapon and manipulates the weapon in order to take Savanah's life. And then Christopher says that Matthew points the firearm at him again, and Christopher wrestles Matthew for the gun again and manipulates the firearm to take Matthew's life. So it's quite a story that Christopher's telling, very secret agent type stuff. So law enforcement, in reading the affidavit, makes it pretty clear that they don't believe what Christopher is saying. He's making up this story. And now we know that, Christopher was lying because the firearm actually belonged to Mirta. So the firearm belonged to his stepmom. So basically, Christopher was just telling a story about, Matthew pointing his weapon at him. So Christopher's trying to make it sound like a self-defense, like he took their lives in self-defense. But law enforcement isn't going for that. So basically, now law enforcement has 3 suspects. The whole family was in on this. So now law enforcement has 3 suspects. And so I imagine that information is going to begin coming out rather quickly. And it seems, like they're going to be able to get to the bottom of this right away. Now, I mean, we know pretty much all the other information. We just don't know why this crime occurred and exactly how the crime occurred. So I'm sure that we're going to learn about that, in the weeks coming, maybe the days coming. So law enforcement seems to be on top of this. So, I'll definitely be keeping up with this story, and as updates come, I'll definitely be updating you all on it. So please stay tuned for my next video. We're going to be talking about the Idaho 4 case, and please and please subscribe to my channel if you like my content. I really do appreciate it. We'll see you next time.